Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Pepis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Michael Hames-Garcia, Professor of Ethnic Studies and Director of the Center for the Study of Women in Society. A native of Portland, Hames-Garcia joined the UO faculty in 2005. His publications include the monographs Fugitive Thoughts, Prison Movements, Race and the Meaning of Justice, and Identity Crisis, Making the Case for Multiplicity, and the co-edited collection Gay and Latino Studies, A Critical Reader, co-edited with Ernesto Martinez. Thanks, Michael, for coming on the show. You're the first male director of the study for the Center for the Study of Women in Society. You are also CSWS's first director of color. Why do you think you were chosen to lead the center?
Well, that's a loaded question. There are a couple of answers for that. I think that one of the reasons I was chosen was because when I applied and was interviewed by the search committee, they liked the ideas that I had for the center and the kinds of directions I was going to take it in intellectually. I think also there's a vacuum at the University of Oregon at the senior levels for full professors who are women of color. And I think that there was a strong desire for the center to, there's been a move for a long time for the center to nurture leadership among women of color faculty. And part of an ideal situation, I think, would have probably been for a woman of color to have been the next director. But there simply are almost no women of color at the full professor ranks on campus, as you know. Mm-hmm. I was seen as someone who was an advocate for women of color on campus, and in that sense, there was another reason for choosing me.
So tell us about your vision, your initiatives, your new ideas that you just alluded to for the center.
Well, one of the things that I'm hoping to do is to the center has sort of three aspects to it. It both develops new research, it funds research, and it disseminates research. The bulk of its activity day to day happens through what are called research interest groups, or RIGs. And those are where new research is developed. And one of the things that I'd like to do is to help bring the RIGs a little bit closer into the center. There's been a bit of a tendency for the center to be a place that people with interdisciplinary interests, or sometimes disciplinary interests, go to get funding to do something that they're interested in, and they form a RIG to do that. But don't necessarily understand what they're doing as the work of the center. It's the work that they're doing in their department or in their departments, and they're grateful to have money to do it. I'd like to have them a little closer in, and to think of the center as this place where that intellectual activity is actually being generated and then funded and then eventually published or disseminated in some other form. And I think one of the ways to do that is to bring the RIGs more in conversation with each other, to think a little bit more closely about a center of focus for the research that's going on. And one of the logical places to think about that is through work on concepts like intersectionality, mm-hmm. Transnational feminism. There are a couple of key concepts that I think can link a lot of the different RIGs together and give more of a branded identity to the center than it's had in the last 20 years or so.
So CSWS has a long and storied 40-year-plus history during which feminism and feminist research has changed significantly. You've just alluded to transnational feminisms and intersectionality. How do you understand the mission in the 21st century?
I think that one of the big changes since the time the center's 40 years old. It was founded in the early 70s. And one of the things that's really changed is the shift from understanding women as a category, as the primary category of analysis, to understanding gender as the primary category of analysis. And this has happened partly through the interventions in queer theory and gay and lesbian studies, but more significantly, I think, through interventions on the part of transnational feminism and women of color feminism that have argued that the ways that women was understood as a category limited an understanding of how women fit into a given society or a given culture in ways that are thoroughly tied up with men and boys and to pull women out of that society as analytically in some ways prevents you from understanding the conditions of their lives. The other way that gender has really become a more important analytical tool is through transgender studies and thinking about, or trans studies, and thinking about the ways in which gender is lived by people beyond the limits of male and female, or woman and man. And so I think that that direction toward that kind of gender studies is really the main challenge that centers like CSWS face in the 21st century.
You are an advocate for collaborative research, and I know that the center is interested in sustaining and supporting collaborative research. How does CSWS do that?
Well, the RIGs are largely collaborative research models. They have a lot of freedom in how they're organized. We have, I want to say 11 RIGs active right now. Some of them function along the lines of reading groups, where they meet, they read texts in common. Others, the UO Coalition Against Sexual Violence, I might have the letters wrong in that, is a RIG that has a specific collaborative research project that it's working on. So there's a lot of different models there, but they're all collaborative and interdisciplinary to one degree or another.
How does the center support undergraduate research, and is that an area of focus for you?
It's not really, to be honest. The center's primary focus is on faculty and graduate student research, and I don't think we've ever really had a model that is set up to support undergraduate research.
Tell us about the Women in the Northwest Research Initiative.
The Women in the Northwest initiative was made possible by a gift to the center in the early 90s, and it basically enables us to expand our what we're able to support, specifically in relation to women in the Northwest. It's been used in different ways at different times in the center's history. There was a period when it was focused primarily on, or the research that was funded by that gift was focused primarily on welfare and poverty in the Northwest. There was a period when it was primarily focused on Native women in the Northwest and women in immigration in the Northwest. Currently, we're helping to support Jennifer Fried's work on sexual assault and on campuses in the Northwest through that gift.
Does the center, so you've talked about the RIGs, does the center have public programming that it supports? Are there fixed public programs, or are there particular public programs that are in the pipeline for this coming year?
We have a program called Road Scholars, ROAD Scholars, and that's basically set up to bring scholars from the UO out into the community. So they give talks with at high schools, with community organizations. There's a link on our website to see what we currently offer for Road Scholars and to request a Road Scholar to come out and give a talk. And it's a very rewarding experience for the faculty who get to, or sometimes graduate students as well, who get to practice presenting their research to a community group, and also often very rewarding for the group.
You've mentioned the RIGs. They frequently are collaborative between faculty and graduate students. The center has a number of things that support graduate student research in particular. Is that correct?
We offer travel grants, which are available to faculty and graduate students. We have research grants, which are available to faculty and graduate students. And then we also have a Jane Grant dissertation fellow. which is a dissertation fellowship that's given to a graduate student in their final year, and it supports them for the year, basically, so they can focus on finishing their research and going on the market.
Can you give us a snapshot of your own scholarly research?
My research has had kind of two different directions to it over my career. One direction is focused on prisons and incarceration in the U.S., particularly in relation to race and ethnicity, but also gender and sexuality. So there's that. And then I've had another line of research that has focused on social identity and the construction of race, gender, sexuality, ability, and sometimes those have overlapped, sometimes not as much.
So tell us a little bit about the most recent monograph, Identity Complex.
Identity Complex was a book that in some ways was a decade and a half in the writing, overlapping with a lot of different projects. It's basically an attempt on my part to really respond to what I see as the major objections to identity politics, to organizing politically around identity categories in order to obtain justice or for justice, and sort of is informed by a lot of research, but also a lot of my work over the course of a decade with the Future of Minority Studies project, which was a national coalition of people and institutions that were trying to advance the study of identity. We were funded by the Mellon Foundation for about 6 years in the early 2000s. And I sort of took all of that and brought it to bear on what I understood as challenges to identity, that it organizing around identity prevents one from developing rich relations of solidarity. That's I think fundamentally that's many people's objection to identity politics. When identity politics gets used as a pejorative, it's often used as an accusation that someone is assuming difference rather than connection. So I wanted to think through, in 4 chapters, looking at different examples, what it would mean to have an understanding of identity that both acknowledges the particularity of a group's experience at the same time that it tries to stress connection and solidarity. And that's really, I think, the ethical imperative of that book. And so the chapters run through thinking about the materiality of race, thinking about questions of multiplicity and multiple identities, questions of colonialism and sexual liberation, and then looking at the prison and trying to sort of in each of those contexts work out what it might mean to have a complex understanding of identity.
The complexity that you've just alluded to, sometimes we speak in the academy about intersectionality. Your work is particularly interested in intersections between gender and ethnic and racial identity. And that, obviously, that's a critical part of the unique perspective that you bring to the Center for the Study of Women in Society. Tell us why that particular complex, that particular intersection, is one that is central to your work, but also is central to what the center should be doing in the 21st century.
Which particular?
Gender and ethnic and racial identity.
Well, the story that I tell in Identity Complex basically is that as our modern concepts of race emerge in, and I depart a bit here from a lot of people in the discipline of English who tend to sort of see the birth of race and the the 18th or 19th century. I think it really emerges in the much earlier in the 16th century. And what emerges largely out of the contact between Europe and the Americas, and then as slavery, transatlantic slavery emerges as a particular model of slavery that understands slavery as a condition that one is born into, and a condition that is natural to one's race. We have a concept of the hierarchy of humans that emerges that is really fairly unprecedented. And part of what it's intended to do is to organize labor. So you have people who are naturally in a state of slavery, people who are naturally in a state of peasantry, people who are naturally not, right? They're workers. And then what we have is, as this model is being imposed throughout the world, part of what it's set up to do is to destabilize indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous ways of organizing the social world, including gender. And so whatever understandings and relations of sexuality, of reproduction, of organizing labor across gender roles that people had in the Americas, in Africa, in the Pacific, become redefined at the same time that colonialism is imposing an understanding of race throughout the world. What that means is that when we ask ourselves today, right, what does it mean to be a white man or a black woman or whatever, both of those terms are interdependent, right? We can't talk about what it is to be male or female, masculine or feminine, black or white, Indian or Pacific Islander, without bringing with those questions of gender, questions of sexuality. The violence of colonialism that imposed race on all of the world's population, including Europe, was the same violence that was disenfranchising women in the Iroquois Confederacy, that was defining white women from Europe as emotional and weak in particular ways and irrational. So all of that was happening at the same time, and you can't analytically pull them apart without leading to threads that are connected with the others.
You've recently edited a special dossier in Aztlan, a journal of Chicano studies, focused on Hotaria Studies. What are Hotaria Studies, and why are they important?
Hotaria Studies is the so Joto is a derogatory term in Mexican and Chicano Spanish. If you were to translate it, it'd be roughly equivalent to fag. So the term Hotaria was emerged primarily out of from queer communities, and in some ways is analogous to the term queer in the way that it's been reappropriated and redeployed. But part of what I argue in the introduction to the Aztlan dossier is that the insistence on a term like Hotaria is not just to translate queer into Spanish or into Mexican Spanish, but to use a term that has a geographical specificity to it, a geographical locatedness. So part of what's happened with the use of queer throughout the academy and the world is it's increasingly become untethered from any kind of geographical locatedness, right? So its origin as a term in the United States with some kind of particular meaning in that context is forgotten, it's erased. It's harder to do that with Joto because you have to ask what it means, at least for the moment. And so it retains that tethering to a geographical space. And part of the effort then in using that term is to think about the geography of knowledge and what does it mean to have this kind of life, think of oneself in this sort of way, have these sorts of relations to other people in this place, right, and not in some other place.
The feminists in the 70s used the slogan, "The personal is political." In the intro to the dossier, you assert that the political is personal. What do you mean by that?
Really that there's a way of understanding events, the quotidian events, as always having within them kernels that are inherited from a long history of colonialism, genocide, and resistance. And so, if I wish I had a snappy example to hand, but if, for example, I'm not going to think of a good example, but basically trying to unearth the traces of historical resistance and historical oppression in what we consider the personal, right? The sort of trivial day-to-day events that don't seem to have grand political importance.
In addition to your duties as director of CSWS and your role as a scholar, you're also an active and accomplished teacher. Can you give us a sense of your interests and aims in the classroom?
In the classroom, I think that my main goal, regardless of the subject matter, is to really have students take ownership of their own learning. I've been known to make a lot of use of sort of having students work in pairs or in groups to explain a text to the rest of the class. Even in a large lecture, when I'm with 150 students, when it's sort of on me to have control over the class, I still force them to do a good amount of participation and a good amount of active learning. But I'm also probably a pretty easy grader, so they work hard, but at the end I'm pretty soft on them.
So you've just described sort of your teaching methods, but you haven't mentioned about your content. And tell us a little bit about that aspect of your teaching.
The content, so I do courses on queer studies, gay and lesbian studies, but my main teaching is certainly related to prisons and incarceration. I do a large course called Social Equity and Criminal Justice, which sort of moves through policing, the courts, and the prison systems. I redesigned that course this last spring to really make gender central to it, and I would say about 40% of the readings were on women or related to women, and I expected that to be some pushback on that, but didn't get it at all. And so it's been great to do that course, and students are really engaged with it. I get a broad mix of students in that as well.
So you've had a fairly lengthy career as a teacher. Have you noticed any changes in the undergraduate? I mean, you just sort of alluded to a change, or you anticipated something and it turned out to be different. Do you think in the past 15 years there's been a change in the way your students are responding to the kinds of courses that you teach, responding to questions of race and ethnicity or gender and sexuality? Have you detected anything like that?
I would say I could probably see that. Yeah, I think that they come in many ways more open than they did in say the late 90s. But I've also, the context for my teaching have changed a lot, so I don't know if I could generalize. You know, I taught in an English department for 6 years and then moved to an ethnic studies department. My teaching now is much more interdisciplinary than it was in the past, and so yeah, I don't know if the students have changed or if I've changed.
That's a good answer. What's planned for this year's Northwest Women's Writers Symposium?
I want to say that I'm not sure that our keynote is confirmed yet, but I know that the woman who organizes the Writers Symposium, Northwest Women Writers Symposium, is Alice Evans, and she was working with Diane Abu Jaber as our main event, and I believe she's confirmed. But they're focusing on food and food justice, and so that'll be the theme of the Writers Symposium, and it always brings a lot of wonderful people.
Excellent. Are there any new projects as a scholar that you've got on the front burner or the back burner? Or has your work as an administrator moved that way out of the picture?
I always have projects on different burners. They're all on simmer at the moment.
Excellent answer. We have about a minute and a half left, so this will probably be the last question. What led to your interests in the topics that you study, the research that you do? How did you get there?
I think that, well, I know with the prisons, it's easy for me to say that I went to graduate school at Cornell, and the first year I was there, they hired a professor in Latino literature. And his dissertation had been on, his name was Ben Olguin, his dissertation had been on writings by Pintos, or Chicano poets, or prison poets. And it hadn't really occurred to me as something you could write on. So that sparked my interest, and then as I learned more about it, it emerged as a question for me that was so ethically important that I couldn't not address it in my work. I could not devote myself to it.
You've just alluded to the ethical importance. We've got like 30 seconds left. For you, I take it that your scholarly work must have a component of social justice. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much, Michael, for taking the time to talk to us about your work, about CSWS, and about the year ahead.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Michael Hames-Garcia, Professor of Ethnic Studies and the Director of the Center for the Study of Women in Society at the University of Oregon. Join me next time when I speak with Patricia Cochran, Executive Director of the Alaska Native Science Commission. She was the keynote speaker at the U of O's third annual Climate Change and Indigenous Peoples Conference on December 2nd, 2014. Thank you so much for watching.